Hello, everybody. Can you hear us?
Welcome in.
Menshi LP asks, "What's the stream talking points?" So we have a little bit of an agenda, but basically we're going to go through um, talking a little bit about um, what's coming in Alpha 3, what was like the philosophy behind it, and when it's actually coming. And I think everyone will be pleasantly surprised that it's probably sooner than you might expect. And we'll go over a little bit of the patch notes, not super detailed, but just some of the um, broad strokes of like what features are coming, um, and also just have a chance to talk through some Q&A if people have questions about what's coming.
Alpha 3 start date announcement today? Yes, basically.
Yeah, so I was going to say maybe now's a good time. I think we've been kind of just chatting and doing random questions, but maybe now's a good time to get into kind of like the more formal structure of the stuff that we wanted to go over. So I think for everyone that has questions, we'll go through and give you guys hopefully a whole bunch of information about Alpha 3, and then we're definitely going to stick around after we've gone through the stuff we want to go over to answer as many questions as we can. So maybe you can hold on to your questions for now and see if we answer them in the next few minutes. And then if we don't, then definitely throw them out at the end and we'll try to answer as many as possible. And we'll also be doing a kickoff stream for Alpha 3 when it does begin, which will be another chance for people to jump in and ask more questions if we don't get to everything today. But I think we'll be able to answer a lot. Cool. So I guess just in case anybody is new here, I guess, do you want to clarify who you are, Tyler?
Sure. Tyler, you may see me in the Discord as 3Blave. I am one of the founders of Clockwork Labs, along with Alessandro, who's a little bit more behind the scenes. We are developing BitCraft. If you're familiar with it already, then you have probably played it, or at least you've been hanging around. And just to give you a quick overview on the game, and then I'll pass it off to Carter. The point of the game is that we want to create a sort of a survival crafting mmorpg. So that would be a game where players come into a wilderness. They are able to terraform the land. They're able to change the landscape however they want, cut down trees, and build a civilization in that wilderness, working together with other players to create a world of their own. And that's the overall pitch of it. And we are well underway in the development of that game. I think it's been maybe 6 years since we started, so it's a long time. And obviously, at the beginning, it was just myself, my co-founder. Carter, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Carter. I'm the game director on BitCraft, and my in-game name that I go by in Twitch and Discord is Minch or Minchcrunch. And also that's what I go by in game. So I'm sure I'll see some of you guys in Alpha 3. And so I guess the next thing I wanted to touch on, which is the elephant in the room, is Alpha 3. What is it? When is it coming? When can you play? So I think the thing that I'll just get out of the way first that I know everybody wants to know is when is Alpha 3 coming? And I don't think I'll be able to announce the time today because I don't think we actually know 100% when the time will be, but it will be on November 12th. So basically 1 week from today. So yeah, very exciting. Yes. So
Hype. Chat is hyped.
And I can't, November 12th. So I can't say for sure how long it will go for, but the plan is to be around or at least as long as Alpha 2, which will basically take us to the end of the year. And so I think realistically, we will have to decide when we bring Alpha 3 down as far as how that'll impact the holidays. I know a lot of people have free time over the holidays and want to play, but we'll also need to make sure that the staff at Clockwork Labs is able to take a break too. So I think for right now, you can expect that Alpha 3 will start on the 12th and it'll go till roughly the end of the year.
I love the comments. The community is what I live for here. It's kind of amazing to see you guys and how much you enjoy the game. Don't destroy your lives though over BitCraft. I know some of you play a lot of time, and that's great. But be easy.
Yeah, I think.
I see Cozy's planning a 24-hour stream. So.
Tactical Missile Aroka asked, will supporter badges be available for purchase again before Alpha 3? So this is really going to depend. Basically, we are going to be selling more founder supporter badges, depending on basically how busy the login queue is in the servers. So if we have room in the game for more people, we're going to be adding more stock to the supporter badges, and we're also going to be letting in people who have signed up on the website who have hub accounts. So yeah, basically there will be more badges for sale, but we want to wait. Based on how many people own badges and how many people have guaranteed access, we don't want to flood the game on the first day and create like a ridiculous queue. So we're gonna play that by ear, and we'll give more information. We'll definitely post in the Discord announcements if we're putting more badges up for sale. So definitely just follow the announcements in the Discord, and you will hear about that.
Antishas says, will players with founder supporter badges have priority login if things are congested? I think in general, yes, because we made a promise to those people that like, hey, if you support us, then we're going to make sure that you're able to get into the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we're also will be opening up the supporter badges again for purchase at some
Yes,
point.
I see some more comments in the chat asking us to open those up again, and so I will definitely talk to Alessandro about that, and I think we can probably, especially before Alpha 3 starts, and there's less like press and kind of less people looking at the game, the people that are really following closely, I think we can give them a chance to get in there and get some supporter badges while we have a limited stock, so we can definitely do that. So
yeah, I would like as many people who want to play and who want to support us to be able to. So that's definitely a goal.
So I guess with that, with the info of when Alpha 3 is coming out of the way, a little bit of details of like where Alpha 3 is at right now. So right now the team is just putting the final touches on things. We're kind of going through the final QA and just making sure that the game is running well, trying to find little straggling bugs and issues and stuff. There was quite a wave of features and all the final stuff that we were trying to wrap up for Alpha 3 because there's so much cool stuff that was in the works that we wanted to show all of you guys. So there's a big wave of stuff that all came through, and now we're just sorting through to make sure that everything is still working correctly. I'm sure there'll be more bugs that you guys will be able to find with just the volume of people that we'll have in Alpha 3, but we're going to do our best to fix as much as possible before you guys get in there. And I guess with that, we can maybe transition into some of the, what I would call like the philosophy of Alpha 3. So these are like basically it's like 5 big things that we wrote down as a team coming off of Alpha 2 that we wanted to be like the main flagship things that we were focused on to really change the game from Alpha 2 to Alpha 3, and to some extent from Alpha 1 to Alpha 3. A few of these things are things we identified all the way back in Alpha 1, but because the production of Alpha 2 was already kind of underway with the focus on adding the Empire scale, some of this stuff is stuff that we've been wanting and intending to improve all the way back since Alpha 1. And so I would actually say that like basically Alpha 3 is the biggest change to the game all the way back since pre-alpha going into Alpha 1, because we've really changed the character scale of the game so much that I'm really excited to see how it goes in Alpha 3.
Shall we get into it?
Sure. So I'll go through the things. I'll go through each of the 5 things, and we can take a few minutes to discuss them and look at chat and see what people think. So the first one is basically we really want to bring a stronger sense of adventure and danger to the world. And so there's a few features that we've added as a part of this pillar to shape the game. And so the first thing is we've basically added aggressive monsters throughout the world. These will spawn depending on the biome, the time of day, and other factors, such as like being near a monster den. These monsters will first like track players if they kind of detect the player, and once they determine that like the player is in a position where they can go for an attack, they'll actually kind of go in and start combat with you. And so you'll need to craft both weapons and armor, as well as other things such as like settlement defenses, vehicles, and other things to basically keep yourself safe, whether you're on the defensive or going on the best offense is a good, or the best defense is a good offense, going after the monsters to take them out. Right now, the monsters in the game,
So,
go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt, but I saw Cozy Sweet's post. There goes cozy time. Ha ha ha. Definitely not. I think if we remove cozy time from the game, then we have done something quite wrong. The idea of adding the hostilities to the game is to make it more cozy, right? So the idea is that if the world is dangerous and I make my cozy little area, then it's going to be even more cozy, and that's an important point about this.
Yeah.
So we definitely want cozy time.
I think a great example is like if you go into Minecraft in creative mode, the game, even if you like build a nice like aesthetically pleasing thing, you're kind of just playing with Legos in creative mode. There is no danger, there's no adversity, and so it doesn't feel as cozy as if you go into survival mode, you clear out an area, you build your stuff, you set up some defenses, and you actually have this area that's carved out as being safe. It feels a lot more cozy in a real like visceral way when you have this like danger beyond the walls and you have the safety within it and you're able to kind of make that yourself. And so that's really what we're going for, of why we're adding more adversity to the game. It's we want to create the sense of the this disparity between like the dangerous wilderness that you can tame and domesticate and make safe and make cozy.
That's exactly right. So it should be an increase in coziness, and if in fact it's a decrease in coziness, we'll make changes to make sure that that's not the case. But that's the plan. And it's also a motivator for you. So what we had a few people play the game, kind of come into the game. If you knew, like a lot of you here know what BitCraft is about, and you knew what you wanted to get out of it immediately, but new players would come into the game sometimes, and they would just like walk in a direction. Maybe they'd ignore the tutorial or whatever, and they could just do that forever, and nothing would ever happen to them, and it was fine. And that's not an amazing experience in terms of motivation. We could put up a quest that says like, oh, you should go do this. But what isn't answered is why should I go do that? And so now the idea is, okay, well, if I just go wandering off into the woods, I might have to deal with some things that is going to be like, oh, I should probably prepare before I go into the woods is kind of the plan, which is the same as the motivation for many survival games, right? If you look at the beginning of something like Valheim, you start punching some trees. Do you punch trees? I think you maybe pick up rocks, but I don't remember. But it doesn't matter. And then you realize quite quickly, oh, I have to. This world is dangerous, and I should prepare. So any chance for more supporter badges? Yes, they will be coming up at some point in time. I think Carter's got to talk to Alessandro about the amount we want to allocate, but keep an eye on our Discord and possibly your email as well, and we'll make an announcement about that.
Yeah, I think maybe for our producer, can we add that below the Alpha 3 coming November 12th? Just add a supporter badges. More supporter badges will be available. I know a lot of people have been asking about that. Well, with animals being a threat to gatherers, that's going to change. So I think a big thing that we wanted to do with this is, I know there's going to be some players who are really excited about combat. I know since we announced BitCraft, there's been players who've been saying like, I want to just fight monsters. I want to do combat in this game. And when we originally mentioned that combat wasn't going to be the main focus of the game, like this isn't a traditional MMO where like the entire gameplay loop is about combat and leveling up your character's combat level and doing raids and dungeons, a lot of players were disappointed. That said, the plan has always been to have combat be in the game. It's just, as we said, like the point of the game is about rebuilding civilization. It's not about becoming a master monster slayer, raid boss killer. And so for those players who are really interested in that, part of what we wanted to do is carve out a way that like you can have a job in the same way that in Alpha 2, if you're an expert miner in the game, you have a purpose in the world economy. Players will want the valuable stuff that you can mine. If you want to be a monster slayer in Alpha 3 and BitCraft, you can outfit yourself with weapons and armor, and there is a way that you can kind of be useful in the world by clearing out enemy monsters, by being like a town guard, by being a mercenary that gets hired to like clear out monster dens in an area so that a new town can be settled there. And you can also kill the monsters and gather drops from them and use that to actually basically like earn money basically in the game. I'll leave that a little bit vague for now, but basically it'll be like in some sense like an activity that you can spend your time doing in the game if you enjoy that. But it's also something that through kind of the proper means of civilization building, you can avoid. Basically, you don't need to ever engage in combat. You can, run away from enemies. You can defend against them and circumvent them.
Or build things that scare them off.
Exactly. So, but you're going to have to invest into other aspects. And in fact, what you might want to do is have a bunch of gatherers go out in their weapons and armor, clear out the enemies in the area, and then take a while to gather in that area once it's been cleared out.
So I don't know if we want to move on from this topic yet, but I'll just preview something that has come up in chat, as maybe we'll come back to. Mere Hardware asks, did you guys do anything to allow players into your city you don't trust, like renting system? It's a great question. It was one of the larger focuses of this thing beyond adversity. So
yeah. So we'll circle back to more Q&A at the end, but I think we can leave the move on from this and actually we'll go down to the next pillar, which is actually right on that note. And so basically the next pillar that I'll talk about, which is actually the third one on my list here, is we realized that there was kind of an issue in the game. That we realized this back in Alpha 1, but it wasn't in time to make changes for this in Alpha 2, and it actually took us quite a while of thinking about it to realize what was the right thing to do. Since the inception of BitCraft, if you haven't already, you can go watch the YouTube video on it. We have this concept of the three scales of the game: the character scale, the settlement scale, and the empire scale. And we always wanted these scales to be separated but interfacing with each other. And the thing we realized in Alpha 1 and again in Alpha 2 was that the character scale and the settlement scale were too interlinked with each other, to the point where basically any player that came into the game that wanted to play the game had to build their own settlement, or they were very, very strongly encouraged to build their own settlement. And this came with it a whole bunch of things that you have to interface with at the settlement scale, like maintaining your claim, expanding your claim, recruiting players to your settlement, dealing with like border disputes with other nearby settlements, or aligning with other settlements, or joining an empire. And a lot of players just wanted to come into the game and play the character scale and not touch the settlement scale, and we didn't have a good way for players to do that. And so what this pillar was about was really about disentangling these scales and making it so the average player that just wants to come in and advance their character can do that without ever touching the settlement scale. And so this is manifested in a number of features and changes to the game, namely that by default, and I believe currently you can't change this, all towns are public. And so if you start a settlement and you build a bunch of crafting buildings in it, any player can just walk into that town and use those crafting stations. What this means, however, is that the crafting stations are I won't say 100%, but they're somewhat like phased to each player, and so you can't just take an item that another player is crafting. There is a certain like throughput limitation of like you can't have a million players using the same workstation at the same time. So the town is incentivized to like build more workstations. But there is like a waiting in a queue system, and there's a way to like once you have a project, if you don't um, um, continue working on it for a while, it'll become inactive and stop using one of the spots. And then you can come back to it, a month later and still resume your crafting or cancel it and get your items back. So we've been playtesting this internally for quite a while, and I believe it's working quite well. I think it really has changed the game in terms of how casually you can play BitCraft now. I think I played a lot in Alpha 1 and I burned out a little bit in Alpha 2 as far as how long I kept playing and how many hours I sunk. I'm really excited about this because it means that if you play really hardcore for a week or two and you get a lot of stuff going on your character and you want to take a break, you can just take a break and you don't need to worry about maintaining anything in the world if you're focused on your character. So you basically can just take that break. You can come back and everything is pretty much where you left it. There's a few things that we're still working out that we've had to like limit certain features in Alpha 3 because we are still deciding what's the right way to solve certain things. But broadly speaking, between the deployables that we added in Alpha 2, so being able to deploy your own personal chest and your personal barter stall, and then being able to use anybody's crafting stations means that any player can just walk into a town, set up their deployables and set up their vehicles, and just use the crafting stations in the town, go out into the wilderness, gather some resources, come back, craft some stuff, bank your stuff in your deployables, and you can basically play the game, solo or socially solo. But you can still trade with other players in these towns. What this is actually doing as well is it's making it that there's way less of a burden for many players to start towns, which means less towns overall. But because every player still needs these towns to advance and use the crafting stations, a lot of players will gather in these fewer towns, and the game feels way more social than it did before. I think there was a few settlements in Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 where there was a large population of players sharing a settlement, but this only would really happen in a trustful way where everyone was kind of in the same clan. Now basically every settlement in the game can operate like this without everyone having to trust each other, and it makes the game just feel so much more social.
Well, I was going to say, perhaps that brings us to another pillar, I suppose, about the player density and some of the stuff that we did.
Yeah, so the next thing I'll go over, which is kind of building off of this one, is how we've altered the new player experience. And so kind of the first big question that we came to when we decided to change the way that players were able to progress at the character scale without needing to make their own settlement was, how do we handle the early game? And so this originally started as kind of like a roadblock of like, well, how do we disentangle the building progression from the character scale, like crafting progression? But actually what I think it led us to was not only like a solution to that problem, but also a much better just new experience, a new player experience for the game of BitCraft. And so basically the way that this has changed is players now spawn in a relatively safe biome, and they go through the very similar like early steps of like learning the controls. But pretty quickly after this, you were basically sending players to a ruined town, as we call it. And this is essentially a very similar to a player-made settlement, except it's basically an ancient ruin that's already in the world. And so what this means is that even in a blank world where no players have set up or done anything, there are some kind of neutral settlements that with the public crafting station changes that we just mentioned, any player can just walk in there, use the crafting stations in this town, and you can just start progressing your character. You can start getting items. You can start crafting stuff without needing to worry about putting down a claim, building all the buildings and all the crafting stations. And what this allows you to do is have a early game and like an onboarding that's really focused on just like learning the mechanics of the game, learning the professions, and advancing your character without being immediately burdened with like place a claim and this is how you expand your claim tiles and this is how you build one of every building even though you're making a claim just for yourself, and having to manage all of this stuff. We can basically move that later in the game for the people who do want to start a settlement and have the average player just go through a much more streamlined experience. That's not only that, it's a lot more social because all these players are ending up in these ruined towns together, where now all of a sudden, if you do want to specialize pretty early in the game, you can do that because there's all these other players around that you can trade with.
Radthor Dax asks a related question: can claim set taxes on crafting stations, different levels for claim members versus public, etc.?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I would say something like that is what we talked a lot about internally. And the biggest thing that we wanted to be careful of in this transition from Alpha 2 to Alpha 3 with these changes I mentioned is that we weren't creating a opposite incentive back towards every player wanting to own their own settlement and feeling like they were constantly being fleeced by the settlement owners. I know this is the case in like games like New World or Albion Online, where other players can own the towns and own the crafting stations, and it creates this sense of like, if I'm not a town owner, I'm the kind of like working class peasant that's being taxed every time I do anything in the game to advance myself. And so I would say it's not out of the question in the future, but we really wanted to grease the tracks on this transition. And so, but we also at the same time wanted to reward settlement owners for creating useful settlements. And so the solution that we came up with is that we basically created a system where if someone gains XP on your claim, it basically generates currency for your claim. And so if you create a really valuable claim that a lot of players are using, you'll basically get free money proportional to how much players are using your claim. But the players don't have to pay that themselves. And so it's not very much. It needs to be at like a large volume to actually be like a substantial amount. And part of this playtest is going to be us dialing in that value. But basically, we wanted to create a system where if you're the type of player that intrinsically just wants to like make a settlement and building a town that's like a hub for everyone is really appealing, we wanted to reward those players because all the other players are going to depend on them to have these player-made settlements. But at the same time, we didn't want to punish the players who didn't start their own settlement by constantly paying taxes to the landlord class of other
Well,
players.
inflation, it's the invisible tax. So there's it's a little bit of that, but I think it's the correct balance.
Yeah.
Respectrum asks, this is a new chatter, what is a settlement? So I'll just give kind of a brief overview of that. So as Carter mentioned earlier, there's 3 scales in the game. There's characters, so you have your character. That's pretty easy to understand. You have settlements in the game, and a settlement is essentially a town. It's a collection of players that all decide to build and work in the same location physically in the world, and you can put a claim on that settlement, meaning that people are restricted in the permissions of what they can do. And that's really all that a settlement is. There's then the 3rd scale, which is the empire scale, which is sort of a collection of settlements. It's a territory capture sort of metagame.
You can think of it as like a kingdom or a country.
Yeah, exactly. So they do kind of map pretty clearly onto what you would imagine their names imply.
So I see someone asked, so let's say you're in a clan, how do you share things within your clan? So some aspects of the settlement still work the way they do before. So you can still add like whitelisted members to a settlement and you can still share inventory access. So all the chests on a claim are not accessible to like anybody. You have to be on the whitelist and given inventory access. So a clan can still own a settlement and they can whitelist their like clan members and determine who gets inventory access. They can also have like clan enterable buildings that only whitelisted people can enter, and then those can have inventory or private crafting stations that only the clan members can use by being inside of one of these buildings. You can also still rent out buildings, I believe. So you could rent out a building to even like a subset of your clan members. So you can still share items and crafting stations and all that kind of stuff with your clanmates through that. It's just that you also have kind of visiting players who are able to use the crafting stations, but not take anything that they're not given access to.
I'll just mention one other thing, which is sort of interesting. Are there any plans of allowing players to set quests, like a claim owner posting quests, or they can use that money they gain from their claim to be used to get things that they might need to keep the claim growing and have the whole thing feed its own pipeline? So
Yes.
one thing I can say is that having developed this game for 6 years, that was something that we wanted to do from the very, very beginning for a couple of reasons, though it's complex and we wouldn't want to do it until late. Let me explain. Um, when you build a system like this, which we did, it used to exist in space in BitCraft. It's complex engineering. If you don't get it exactly right, people won't use it, and then it's a huge waste of resources. What is essentially very similar to a quest is just normal trade between players, right? So with a quest, it sort of implies that I know what I want up front, and that you see what I want, and then you go get it, and I still want that thing. With trade, what it is I'm going to get things that I know people want in general, and then if somebody has already done that, I can pay for it now. So basically, I take my money, and when I buy the thing, I can get it immediately rather than having to wait an indeterminate amount of time for somebody to go get that. So it's not useless. It's a thing that could be valuable, particularly for like rarer things or sort of small things, but that in general, you want to make sure you have a healthy trade system before like sort of a quest system of this kind.
Yeah.
And we are still working on that. I don't know if Carter, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, to build off of that, we had a lot of conversations leading up to Alpha 3 on the design team about what was basically like, we definitely know that we want some sort of like player made quests or jobs or job postings, whatever it is. And so we wrote down a list of like, what are all the things I would want another player to do that I would want to like make a job for? And we found that the vast majority of them could be done simply through the trade in the game that already exists. For example, like if I want someone to if I want to give someone a quest to like go chop down a bunch of trees and bring back a bunch of logs, I just set up a trade order where I'll pay the person for delivering me X amount of logs, right? And that trade order is essentially the quest. They go get the logs, they bring it back, they turn it in, I pay them the money. And in fact, a player can do that quest as many times as they want until I run out of money or until I run out of stock of how many times I'll do the trade. And so players can already essentially, depending on how you consider the UX of it, players can already basically create these jobs and stuff. There are some things that we would like to be able to do in the future that we can't do through the current trade system. For example, like, hey, I would like someone to make a road between this town and this town. The challenge with that becomes, how do we, as like the game backend, validate whether the player actually did that without creating like a very, very complicated system to determine like what constitutes a road, what constitutes like, is the road direct enough, or was it done in a very meandering way that isn't how it should have been built? How do you program that to be validated? And so the way that we actually want to do some of these things overall, but especially in the short term, is having some things in the game where there's a certain sense of like player trust or informality to things. Like, we want BitCraft to be a social game, and so having some aspect of like, I'll pay you 1,000 coins to build this road, and there's a certain level of trust and reputation, and if someone knows that I'm not a man of my word, then that will spread around the community. And so we do want some aspects of the game, especially at the settlement and empire scale, to introduce a level of trustfulness in the other players, whereas at the character scale, we want things to be more guaranteed and transactional. And that's where you can do mostly everything through trade orders right now.
Not even a joke here, Carter. For something like that with the road thing, we could come up with some kind of system where we feed that into like ChatGPT and like a picture of the map and say like, did the person functionally do this?
Yeah.
And then if it says yes, we say like, okay, yep, the quest is done. That would be crazy, but
I think if you look at other social games too, I think we might even not need a system, because there might be player merging stuff. Like I could imagine like a player version of escrow being set up in the game, where it's like some very reputable players set up a system where they say like, hey, we'll act as an escrow agent for certain deals, and they act as like a reputable third party, and then players go through them and they're able to make a commission off of that or something to that effect. Like, part of the vision of BitCraft is to leave some room open for these like social dynamics to kind of come into play in the game. So someone can take that as a good idea for Alpha 3 if you want to go start your escrow company in BitCraft. But I'm sure there's going to be other ideas for, someone could make a gang of mercenaries that can be dispatched to clear out monsters to settle, dangerous biomes. And so part of what we didn't want to just create a transactional thing for everything. We wanted to leave some doors open for things like that to happen.
We've got 3 pillars, right? So we've got adversity and danger. We've got
public towns, I'd call it, or like settlement. Public towns or like settlement and character scale.
Yeah, separating the character scale out. We've got the new player experience that's been improved.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll mention about the new player experience before we move on. So we talked about the ruined towns and everyone spawning at the same place. There's 2 other things about this that we didn't touch on yet. One of them is that all of these ruined towns in the world will have a new waystone system. So you'll be able to basically teleport to any other ruined town. So if your friends end up at a different ruined town,
I was also wondering if that possibly would lead into another pillar, which is trade, and what we wanted to do to fix that.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention one other thing about the onboarding, and then we'll jump right to that one. So the waystones, just because I know a lot of people were asking about like, can I get to my friends? And so I wanted to touch on this under the onboarding thing. So once you reach the ruined town, this is intended to be like essentially your home base for as long as you want until you graduate to a player settlement. And so this ruined town you can't stay here forever. It can only go up to tier 2 right now. So you can spend potentially like the first few hours or first few days of the game working out of this ruined town, but eventually you'll kind of graduate and you'll want to move to a player settlement so you can advance to higher tiers. And the other aspect to that is that as you play through kind of like the character scale progression and get through the onboarding experience of like learning how to play the game, we've also added a post onboarding kind of, I wouldn't exactly call it a quest line, but a goal that you can work towards that ties into the story of the game and exploration and kind of puts you on your own personal like player journey. It's not something that it's not like a main quest line where you're constantly having to like follow this thing. You'll do a little bit of it, and then you'll have some requirements that will be something you'll need to work for, and so you'll be able to focus on whatever your personal goals are for a while, and then once you meet those requirements, you'll be able to cycle back and kind of continue to advance on this kind of through line that takes you through the whole game the more you play, and you're able to explore various parts of the world. So we can so the next pillar, as Tyler already mentioned, is basically changes to the economy. I think especially the last 2 alpha, like in the previous pre-alphas, we'd put a lot more effort into kind of more balanced versions of the in-game economy, but over the later pre-alphas and into the alphas, we focused more on some of the item progression of things, and we kind of left the currency side of things and the interplayer economy a little bit to the wayside. And so we've circled back on that, and it's definitely not where we want to get it to for beta yet, but it's, I would say, much improved from how it was in the past alpha. And basically the way that we've changed, or the way that we believe we've set the economy on a much better course for Alpha 3 than it was in Alpha 2 is the following. So we've revisited all the sources of hex coins in the game to basically make it so that the amount of hex coins being put into the game is reasonable. In fact, the main way that you get hex coins is actually by creating valuable stuff that a player could use, but also a traveler might be interested, and you can basically turn it over to them in exchange for some hex coins that they've gathered. You can also get hex coins by, like I mentioned, killing monsters or finding stuff in ancient ruins, but it's a lot more contained as far as like how much hex coins can be minted into the economy. It's a lot more basically it's not going to be like a runaway train of just like way too many hex coins getting generated. The other thing is we unified the traveler currencies, which were never really supposed to exist. It was kind of like a stopgap until we got to a later like reputation system with the travelers that we've been wanting to do. But for now, we've basically leveled the playing field. So basically anything that the traveler has that you want or need, you're going to be using coins. And so I think what we found in Alpha 2 was that in some ways the economy was not super good with hex coins, but in other cases with like marks of Brico, it was actually a very good currency. In fact, players were more likely to be using like ancient nails or marks of Brico as a currency than they were to be using hex coins because of how important they were to progression. And so now stuff that you previously were turning in marks of Brico for is now you're needing lots of hex coins to do those as well. We've play tested a decent bit internally, and I think we've got the numbers in a pretty good spot. Obviously, we'll need a lot of you guys to jump in there and play to tell us where we messed up. But we've tried, I would say the other thing too is like we've tried to balance it maybe a little bit undertuned so that we don't have a case of like we generate too much stuff into the economy and then we can't fix it. We'd rather have it be like, hey, this feels a little too tough, and then we can make it a little bit easier till we hit the sweet spot. So I'm hoping that in the ways that certain desirable items existed in Alpha 2, we've now shifted that over and kind of merged that all onto the hex coins. And so these will be usable for advancing your deployables, building valuable aspects of settlements. We've also introduced the fact that hex coins can be converted directly into supplies at a 1-to-1 ratio. And so part of what we found in our internal testing was a really cool system where because you can convert coins into supplies for claim maintenance, however, you have to do this by bringing the coins to a traveler. What this means is that you can basically, and when you get the supplies from the traveler, you have to bring it back to your settlement to actually like deposit them. And so what we found is basically any settlement can set up a trade order where they're basically trading, I'll pay you 100 coins for a 100 supply pack. And basically a player can go take 100 coins to a traveler, buy a supply pack, bring it to the town and sell it to the town. And now we basically have like a trade run quest or like job that players can do. And now if you're paying 100 coins for a 100 coin supply pack, why would someone do that job? It's a waste of time. So in fact, what you'll see is different towns will be bidding basically different amounts of like how many coins on top of the cost will they pay for the round trip of like how far do you need to go to the traveler to do that supply thing. So now we've created a system where essentially a town can say, hey, we'll pay 10% markup on supplies, and they basically just set that trade order, how many times they want it to run, and players can see that posted trade. They'll go to wherever traveler they want, grab as many supplies as they want, bring it to the town, give the supplies to the town, and get paid for it. And at the same time that I already mentioned, that town is minting free coins based on how many players are using the town. So if you have a very bustling town, you can basically set up this trade order and basically like not do anything yourself, and players will use your town, you'll generate coins, you use that extra profit of coins to basically set a trade order where you buy supplies, and you let those players who want to earn a bit of those coins back from you to buy their upgrades basically do trade runs for you to create those supplies for your town. And so we found in small scale testing that this basically allowed settlements and players to basically work in like a symbiotic relationship, where essentially players want the coins to buy upgrades, the towns can mint the coins, and the settlements also need the supplies, and the players can go get the supplies or craft the supplies. And so all of these things work together to.
So anything besides, I think we should probably move on to the next thing besides the coins that we've mentioned.
So that's basically like the underlying aspect of the economy. The other thing that we identified as being the biggest, honestly, like the biggest hurdle in the economy was actually the friction of like, it wasn't that there wasn't enough items that people wanted to trade. It was that it was too hard to trade them.
Presumably chicken branch's question is relevant then.
Let me take a look here. I
see.
Anything added to make it easier to find out what trades. So yes, exactly. In fact, I think we determined that like more so than any of the changes that I just mentioned, that was the single biggest thing that was stopping people from trading. Even in Alpha 2, there was stuff that some people had and other people wanted, and they could have done a trade, but they just didn't know about each other. And because it was so the risk of like traveling somewhere to see if you could trade something and then not having it be in stock was so high that it just wasn't worth it unless you knew for sure that you were kind of chatting with someone and agreeing to trade something. And so what we added that is the biggest contributor to this is what we call the trade finder. So this is a new window that you can open in the game, and you can basically search from trade orders from across the whole world. And what this means is that you can, if you have an item in your inventory and you're like, hey, say you're just a forester and you don't have a settlement, you're just wandering the world, you walk out into the forest and you just say, I'm going to just start cutting trees. And once your cart gets full of logs, you can just say, okay, where can I get a good pay for this this cart full of logs? You can right click on the logs, you can say look up in the trade finder, and you can basically search and say, okay, this town over here will buy my logs for this price. This town over here, it's a little bit further, they'll buy it for a higher price. And you can make that decision. Do I want to go to the further town and sell my logs there to get a better price? Well, then you can say, well, okay, show me everything else that's available in this town, the further town. And then you can basically see, okay, well, if I take my logs to sell them there, what could I buy while I'm there? Oh, there's a place where I can buy some new food in that town. Someone else has set up a deployable where they're actually selling a better axe that I could buy. Okay, so you can basically like, we're going to continue to add more features to this trade finder, but right now there's already a lot that you can do with it, where you can say like, okay, show me what else this shop has in stock in addition to the trade that I just searched for, or show me what else is available in this entire settlement. And so the way it works right now is, in order for your trade order that you have to be listed in the trade finder, it has to be on a claim. So you can't just go deploy your barter stall in a random spot in the forest and have it be searchable in the trade finder. The reason for this is we want to create trade hubs. We want to have people aggregating their stuff and not having everyone just trying to like make their own little like forest trading place. And because we find that when you bring more people to the same place to trade, it's more than the sum of its parts. It creates like a non-zero sum game where everyone can trade and have better
Well, it's a bit of a positive
experience.
feedback loop, right? If there's a single place for people to trade, if you can know you can go to a place for trade, then there's more people there to trade. Then there's more people there to trade. There's more people there to trade. It's like a bit of a runaway train.
Exactly. So we're hoping that these things in combination, there's a bunch of other small stuff, like we added a wallet system where you can carry coins not in an inventory slot, so you can there's a bit of just a quality of life there, and some other smaller changes like that. But the two big ones are basically changes to just like the sources and sinks of the coins in the economy, so that we actually have a stable currency, and hopefully making the world much smaller.
Yeah, I suppose can we talk a little bit about density, or at least I'll throw in the fact that you can now build. Well, go ahead. You can take it away, Carter.
So maybe what do you mean exactly by density?
In terms of the teleportation around, right? So
Yeah.
one of the problems with trade, like there were several problems. One is you didn't know what the price of anything was. One was you didn't know where you could go trade. So it's like, oh, am I going to go over there and find out I can't trade and then come back? It's like, no, it's not worth it. And then the other one is, well, it was often better for me to just go do the thing myself, because the density of players was not such that there was somebody near enough to me that I could just get the thing from. So increasing the density, sort of people per unit area, or I should say effective area based on travel speed, limited when it would make sense to trade.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
There's
So
also, I suppose, an aspect of specialization as well. And we did make certain changes, right? Those were implemented. I don't recall if they were, where towns don't need now everything.
so there's some stuff that we've wanted to do that we didn't get into for Alpha 3, but the intent, so I can talk a little bit around the teleportation and the what our vision is for settlements. And so I think the thing that we saw in Alpha 2 was that all of the big clans and all of the big settlements tended to basically build roughly in the center of the world in the same biomes, and especially they would build close to each other, which allowed them to trade with each other. This is great, and I think we'll see some aspect of this in Alpha 3, but the part of what we wanted is to reward players who go to these distant biomes in the further reaches of the world and actually like settle them. Whether it's a like mining outpost in the desert, whether it's a a mountaintop base in the peaks, or a swamp base in the swamp. We wanted to create a incentive for those players to go do that, and so we also had the thing that players were doing that we wanted to discourage a little bit, which was having players basically just like go somewhere, gather a bunch of stuff, and then teleport home, and just always basically bringing everything back to their same base. And so we wanted to basically change a little bit how that was happening. And so now that because previously you had to bring stuff back to your settlement, and we had a limit of not letting you build multiple settlements, it created this thing where like certain clans would have like outposts and stuff, but ultimately everyone would have their main base kind of in the same biome. And so now the way we've changed it is most of the gathering professions will now give you cargo. This cargo can't be processed in the field, but you can process it at anybody's settlement if they have the crafting stations. And so what this kind of incentivizes, and on top of that, if you process it in someone's settlement for the XP that you gain while you're there, they'll be earning currency. And so what this hopefully creates is a system where if you realize that a lot of people are, going to the desert to gather certain materials, you might decide, well, I'm going to go set up a settlement in the desert, and I'm going to stock it full of heat protection consumables. I'm going to stock it full of mining processing bases, and so or like crafting stations. And so what this means is when people go to the desert to gather a bunch of materials, instead of like filling up your boat and then going all the way home, or filling up your inventory and teleporting home, now what you're going to want to do is, well, you're going to go to the closest town, and when you get to that town, you're going to process the cargo there, and you're going to turn it into items, and then you're going to have this choice: do I sell these items and just take the currency? Do I put them in a personal store? Like, do I make it deployable here that I stockpile all my items and then eventually someone else from my clan comes and picks them up? Or do I ferry them back myself? You might even decide that, hey, actually, you don't even want to waste your time out in the desert mining the rocks yourself. You just go to the desert mining town and you just buy the ore there that someone else who's just a miner who's playing solo just sold it to a shop there. And so we're kind of hoping that this idea of like going into a town that's not your own town to offload stuff, buy supplies that you might need for your adventuring, and also being able to like store stuff in another town by setting down vehicle or deployable.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm a little bit cognizant of time. I'm wondering if we could maybe share some visuals with people. That might be interesting for people to see some sneak preview stuff if you've got some. Well, would you be open to sharing the starter town concepts?
Yeah, I think we could probably share that. I don't see any reason why we couldn't share that.
Your way.
A few other things that I can mention that I think are going to be some fan favorites from the community. So one thing is, I mentioned weapons and armor. So this does actually mean that functional clothing is coming back. This is something that we, I know, controversially removed at some point in our aim to give people more customization control in the game. But we've brought it back in a way that I think maintains the sense of like collecting appearances and having cosmetic control over your character, while also having functional clothing be an aspect of the game that is gives kind of tailoring and leatherworking and smithing more of a function than they otherwise have. So I know that'll be very well received by everyone.
Well, and the way a question, Carter, what about the I don't want to spoil things, but the dungeon concepts, are we possibly those or no?
It depends which one. Are you talking about the ancient ruin?
I am.
Yeah, I think we could show that. So I think I'll mention, I guess, quickly about that. So before people get excited about dungeons, basically this is a visual overhaul to the ancient ruins that we've previously had in the game. So this has just kind of been coming through very recently, and so it's not going to be kind of propagated through everything in the game. We've basically been going through some of the previous ancient ruins and updating their visuals. So we might be able to. Cool. So yeah, I see right now on screen is the ruin town. So this is a concept. So in game it doesn't look exactly like this, but this is a.
To be honest, it looks really good in game.
Yeah, and so I think the biggest thing is I think with the ruined town, but also with the player settlements, we've pushed the size of the settlements up a lot. I think we really wanted to make sure that if you were building a settlement that everybody could be hanging out in, that you weren't limited by the size. And so I think the biggest change that I guess is also worth mentioning is the initial starting cost of a settlement, because you don't need to start a settlement right away at the very beginning of the game, has been raised. It's been put in a position so that you really know what you're getting into. If you want to start a settlement, you know that this is something that will have a maintenance cost, an upgrade cost, and an initial cost. But with that initial cost, we've been able to make maintaining the settlement, I think, a lot easier, especially with some of the other things that I mentioned of being able to kind of like have this feedback loop of minting currency and then using that to make supplies and maintaining your settlement through that. So not only is the ruined towns quite large and feels like very expansive to fit potentially hundreds of players in one of these ruined towns, the player settlement size is also pushing up as well. So up on screen now is some weapon concepts. So there's going to be a few different weapon types in the game, and right now these weapon types are not super distinguished, but they do have a little bit of a kind of role specialization, I guess you could say, with them, so that there is the concept of like being kind of a tank and being like a DPS, and so you can have someone with the shield like taunt enemies and generate more threat, and have the the glass cannon with the giant sword hopefully avoid getting attacks too much. This is definitely in very, very early stages and is going to receive a lot more care in the upcoming playtests, but I think it's at a decent starting point for now. You can share that one, Tyler. That it didn't make it into game in kind of
right
a super similar look to that, but it's definitely like a nice, like, it's showing kind of the direction we're going and some of the mood that we're aiming for. I think it's fine to share that.
Paste it over here.
I saw a few questions that I just wanted to go over. So Zozo Oates asked, but what about the crafting higher tier stations? Can we process all the cargo collections at any station? So you do still need to process stuff at the given tier of station or higher. That said, with the changes we've made to settlement advancement and how many players, because not every player needs their own settlement, the burden of like actually reaching these higher tiers is much more, I believe, much more accessible. I think the rate that we saw the larger organized groups progressing through the tiers in the previous pre-alpha, but the previous alpha test wasn't too crazy. And in fact, with the changes now where the vast majority of low-level players are going to be just generating tons of resources that they don't have a use for, these are all going to funnel together to these settlements, and I think advancing these settlements is going to be even easier than it was in Alpha 2. That because I think I mentioned already, we've removed the limit for claims, so a given clan or group can have as many claims as they want. They can all be owned by the same person if you want. And you can hopefully advance several of these.
We could do the town center concept too, if you wanted to. But
sure, yeah, it's basically it's just a zoomed in part of the center of the ruined town. Ideally, I was going to show the ruined town on stream, so I don't think there's any problem with. I see people asking for the monster picks. I'll see what I can do about that.
There's some stuff in Share Your Work, but it's obviously low res because it was just like screenshots, like the jackal. I guess we could share that. Just a little bit of a tease there.
Cool.
Oh, baby.
So this is one of the monsters that you might encounter in Alpha 3. This is definitely intended to be a much more formidable monster. And so if you see one of these, I would say definitely don't try and take it on by yourself.
Well, if monster scary, why cute? Is the question we have in chat here. If not friend, why friend shaped?
We'll see. I mean, I think it's not out of the question that this species could be friendable in the future.
So that's kind of fun. Slap open the signpost. I think that'll be fun too.
Yeah. So this is another getting into some of the. So I actually, I'll preface this by going on a short tangent, but one thing I saw coming up a few times that I didn't have a chance to comment on in the chat was people asking about bridges. I actually, in fact, Zozo Oats, will we be able to terraform water? Will there be bridges? So there are. This is something that we spent a lot of time discussing leading up to Alpha 3, and there is not. There will not be bridges in Alpha 3, but there will be elevators. And so we've actually talked how the elevators are probably going to expand into BitCraft's version of bridges. This still requires a bit of technical exploration and design exploration, but basically, essentially, there's a challenge with bridges because how do you have a bridge that you can like walk over, but you can also not obstruct boats going through the river or kind of having stuff go under the bridge? And so the way that we're probably going to do bridges is more like a gondola, like a flat kind of gondola. And this basically means that like elevators, bridges, funiculars, all this stuff will basically kind of eventually probably be like the same system where it's essentially like you have like point A, point B, like platforms, and then you'll have like a way that you can kind of go between them, basically.
It's a little mini teleport is kind of what Car's saying, although maybe in some deep future we could have them be.
You can think of it as like a whether it's like a chairlift for like a ski hill or like more of like a gondola, but
yeah, let's see if we can find
yeah, I think we'll try and pull up a concept for this single person elevator that we will have available in Alpha 3. I would say that's the one that we should show. We did concept some other stuff that won't be available in Alpha 3. But what this also, I guess what you're seeing on screen right now is another type of building that we also wanted to add. Basically, we were trying to add a whole bunch of stuff that we thought is like, these are things that people have asked for to be in the game. They're things that we think would be cool in the game or would be useful in the game. And so elevators was one thing, and we'll expand that in the future. And another one that you're seeing on screen here is signposts. So you will be able to basically build essentially like signposts and write messages on them. And through the feature that we added last alpha, which allows you to kind of hit previously it was on the Alt key, but we've moved that to another key, so you're not like Alt tabbing or Alt F4ing by accident. Basically, you can hit another key, and it will show the labels above stuff. So when you enable that, the sign, you can go up to the sign and read it, but you can also see the contents of it through the inspect labels as well. I saw someone posted and was asking, can carts go on elevators? The real question. So right now, with the elevator that we will have in game for Alpha 3, the answer is no. However, we're looking at exploring some ways that transporting stuff could be done in the future. And so whether it's like some sort of like cargo elevator or letting you have a vehicle go on the elevator, we're still figuring out exactly what makes sense for that. But I think we're going to try to add as much kind of cool stuff in this vein as possible.
Yes, I am not able to find the elevator, but also
I think it's up on screen right now.
okay, my stream is frozen. Oh yeah, there you go. Thank you. Which is pretty hype. I mean, I also have a road addiction. That's my primary motivator
So one other thing that I believe we got working is, which I know was massively requested and in fact was a feature in the game a long time ago and had to be rolled back because of some technical issues that I think we've resolved, is I believe that roads will be giving improvements again when you stand on them and walk on them. So now we have returned the days of basically being able to build roads that will allow you to traverse more efficiently from place to place. And so hopefully the fact that towns are now public, so visiting someone else's town actually has a purpose now, and the trade finder exists, and the economy is hopefully strengthened. There's an even bigger reason to go like travel from town to town. Now, some of these things like these elevators and these roads, but also the dangers that you might encounter along the road, and thus the motivation to, build lamps along the road, have a guard or a team of people kind of travel together for safety in numbers. I think it's really going to change the way people play the game. In fact, we've already seen the just like internal play tests of some of these features kind of all working together. Obviously with a small amount of people just playing internally on the team, but just seeing how this has just changed the dynamics of the game gets me really, really excited about what we're going to see happen in Alpha 3.
It's big change, and for what it's worth, for those of you who are curious, the metrics in terms of like how much you guys played were pretty good in Alpha 2. They were very good, so we're very excited to see how they're going to even be better in Alpha 3. Alpha 3 is coming November 12th. It's got a lot of cool new stuff. It has combat, more combat. Things are dangerous. It's exciting. It has better single player experience, so you can go around and use other people's towns. It has a better onboarding experience, so your new player experience, you get to go in an ancient ruin town and you don't have to build one yourself. It has better trade. We've balanced trade. We've made it easier to move around and do a lot of stuff. That's pretty much is those main ones. I forget one. I think I did, but that's the main thing. Join up, drop in our Discord, and check things out. That's the speedrun version.
Yeah, I think that hits the main points. I think the trade finder is a big one. The improvements to the currency is another one. One that we didn't mention, basically the last pillar. I think if you remember, the pillars that we hit were the adversity and the danger and combat stuff, the new player experience, the settlement and character scale disentanglement, the economy. And the last thing, which we didn't touch on, was basically essentially just quality of life and improvements. So a bunch of big improvements were made to performance. In fact, I think a lot of players reported having some serious issues with like their GPU going to like 100%. We nailed down the source of that, and we haven't been able to like completely rework it in a way that like 100% removes that, but basically it was due to like a certain shader on the grass. And so we created a whole bunch of settings that allow you to basically control how much grass is rendered and how kind of performance intensive it is. So essentially you can like turn all the grass off and your GPU will be back down having no problem whatsoever. If you want, you can crank it up as much as you desire. And so this also means that I think actually if you ran the game before on like low in the grasslands versus now on ultra with the grass just put at like 40%, ultra now with a massive render distance runs better than like low in the grasslands ran before for most people. So like the GPU issue there is much improved, and just seeing the game with like the ultra render distance all the time is so nice. It just makes the game look so much better. Another thing is we added the ability for during trade, crafting, and gathering, your nearby deployables like vehicles and caches inventory can be considered. So if you have a cart full of like 30 wood chunks or stone chunks or something like that, you can go up to a store and you can just sell all of them from your cart. You don't need to like pick them up onto your back one at a time. Yeah, I knew everyone was gonna love that. I wanted to make sure we didn't forget to mention that one. And you can also go like take your cart and drop it beside a tree, and then you can cut the tree and your cart will like fill with all the trunks. It's possible that this is like too OP, so we'll have to keep tabs on just like how strong this is if we need to like balance the size of the vehicles to a bit more to accommodate this. They've already been tweaked slightly. The other thing is we've dramatically changed the inventory stacking. So most items that previously stacked to 1 now stack to 10, and static buildings, so like chests, but also like static deployables like your cache, as well as any other like static buildings, so like carts wouldn't count. They have even more storage. I think it's like 10 times or more. So it's 10 times the 10. So like you can put like 100 ingots in a single stack in a chest, compared to how it was before. So managing all of the inventory stuff is much
I believe Chad is somewhat invested in whether fish stack.
Fish. I believe the fish stack, like if they were previously stacking to 1, they now stack to 10, basically across the board.
Fish stacking.
So the part of what this means is, I think one thing that was let me gather my thoughts here. One thing we do like is the fact that like large towns could have like huge like networks of like storage. I think we don't want to create a world where like a massive town just has like 3 storage chests that have everything in them. But what we also need to consider is that as you go up the tiers, you end up having like an item of every tier that you need to store and like kind of maintain. And so part of what we wanted to do was like increase the depth of each slot, basically, so you can store a lot of stuff in a single slot, but we can also like lower the starting amount of slots in the chests and still have them be, way more storage than they were in the past, but also make it so that like as you scale up the tiers and you get better chests, we don't like get to this crazy ludicrous amount of slots where like a single chest has like 100 slots or 200 slots. Now we can go from like 6 slots to 12 slots to 18 slots, and each of these slots can hold like 100 items. So it's still, building a dozen chests in your base and labeling them for various things is totally still possible. But it also means that you don't have to like, hey, I have an inventory of logs that I'm bringing back to base. Now I have to like fill 3 chests just to deposit all of those. So I think that's a huge improvement.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say goodbye to everyone. It's always great to see you. Thank you so much for coming to the stream. Very, very excited to see you in Alpha 3. I think it'll be a great time.